like everything else in life, everybody's experiences are obviously going to be different. So it really depends on who you ask the question to. It really depends on what side of the fence you're sitting on. And it also depends on your location, I would say. So there are different types of racism. There's obviously blatant racism where people will just point blank tell you,
ugly blasted.
And I think there's undercover racism, where people are actually racist, but they probably don't even realize they're racist themselves, or maybe they kind of do. I don't know how it works. But those are the situations where you kind of feel like you're being discriminated against, but there is no other legitimate reason except for maybe your race.
Is that a chip on the shoulder? Is that stuff just the imagination?
Or have a predetermined idea about a particular type of person, and so we treat them differently because of the ideas that we have about them. So I think in Britain we experience the second more than the first, or for me personally, I can't speak for every black person or every person of colour, but for me personally it's been the second, where people do things and you go, hang on a second, would they have done that if I wasn't black? Maybe, maybe not. My first experience of being racially abused, I don't know if abuse is even the right word. So when I was about 14 years old, I was coming home from school, and it was in the winter. If you know anything about winter in the UK, it gets dark really, really early. So it gets dark about 3:30, and I was coming home from school on this particular day, and I was sitting on the bus downstairs, because buses normally have a upstairs or a downstairs, and I was sitting at the back, and this guy was sitting on the opposite side of the bus, and he was going to get off the bus, but he came towards me and he just said in my face, if you come round here again, I'm going to kill you. And I kid you not, I was absolutely petrified. I almost wet myself. I just couldn't understand it. I didn't get why somebody would randomly come to me and say this. I was so scared. I was only about 4 or 5 stops from my house. And at that time, we lived in an area that wasn't very culturally diverse. So dealing with racism was something that I didn't really experience, but I just knew we were a minority. There were probably like only 2 black families in the whole of the area, or that I knew anyway. That really petrified me. I couldn't sleep that night. I had to sleep in my mum's bed, and as a 14-year-old, it's just not something you should have to go through. So it taught me at a very young age that people hated me just because I'm me, for no apparent reason. So there definitely is blatant racism, but I wouldn't say it's an everyday thing, or not for me anyway. For some people it might be. So I can give the example of my husband. My husband worked for a company where he was racially abused every single day. People were calling him a monkey. He was the only black guy there, and they were calling him a monkey. They were asking him what kind of huts he lived in Africa. They were doing the most. It was really heartbreaking to see him go through that, because every day for him to get up and go work there was so hard. And the joke about that situation is that the people who were being racist, they were actually not British people. They were Eastern European people. So I think the government or the environment is portrayed as, diversity and no discrimination and stuff, but it definitely exists. It's certainly not as bad as some other countries that you could not pay me money to go to. My uncle has a friend who's just recently passed away, and although it was like 25 years ago, he went to work in a country in Europe that I'm not going to name, and he was racially attacked, and he was left paralyzed from the neck down as a result of it. Those kind of countries, I'd never step in there. So I don't think Britain is definitely that bad. But then, we've certainly had our past as well, where things have not been so great. There definitely is blatant racism, but I don't think it's so common anyway. Not for me. For some people, that might be their reality, as it was my husband's for a long time. So I think I've probably experienced a bit of unconscious bias, where people are treating you differently, but maybe they don't realize they're doing it, or maybe they do realize they're doing it. I couldn't tell you. I'll give you a few examples. So my husband and I a few times have been to the countryside. We want to get away from urban living, and you go somewhere that there aren't a lot of black people, or is not very culturally diverse like where we live, and people just stare at you. They just look at you, and it's really unsettling. It really makes you uncomfortable, because you just think, why are you looking at me? And it used to really bother me before, but the older I've got, it's either I just don't notice they're doing it, or maybe people are just more culturally aware. I really don't know what it is. We walk into a shop and you're being followed by the security guard. There are like 20, 30 other people in the shop, but it just appears that every time you turn around, the security guard is like breathing down your neck. So this is what I mean by unconscious bias, where it's either these people don't realize that they are doing it and they're making you feel uncomfortable, and the only reason that they could be doing this is because of your race, or they are doing it intentionally. So another example is when I was at school, when I was doing my GCSE. So I was a teenager, I wasn't that old, probably about the same age as the racist incident that I explained earlier, and I was a really good kid. I did really well in school. I was not a naughty child. I wasn't brought up that way. I was brought up getting beaten, so I would never have gone to school and been naughty. But I actually remember my science teacher telling me once, I'm never going to amount to anything. And I actually, till today, don't know why he said that to me. I'm in my 30s now, and I think about that, and I don't get why he said it. And the only thing I can actually conclude on is, was he being racist? I don't know. Was he doing it on purpose? Was he having a bad day? Did he say it to other kids? I've got no clue. Gonna take a break. So there are those kind of incidences that happen, and you actually just don't know why they happened. The only conclusion you can come to sometimes is because of your race, which is really quite sad. People also talk about institutional racism.
In Hartlepool, they don't like coloured people. I'll tell you, as you're walking around, you watch the taxi drivers, you won't see a black man.
Actually, I've been surprised there's not as many immigrants here.
They persecute the bastards.
Unless you connect and understand what it feels like to be on the side of limited power in the world, and to not be getting access to opportunities, to know that you put in a CV and your name shows your ethnicity and you are significantly less likely to be hired, you're significantly more likely to be stopped and searched.
Ethnic minorities are more likely to get university degrees, but are then paid less than white people with the same qualification. And the report argues minorities are vastly underrepresented in positions of power, making up less than 6% of members of parliament, judges and police officers.
So I think things are better than they used to be, or maybe they're not. I think perhaps maybe people are just better at disguising it.
People often don't own up to it if they are racist. It's the famous thing about, I'm not racist, but. And so it's very difficult to know how much racism there really is in society.
Footballers, they get racially abused, and they get lots of abuse in comment sections and stuff. It's all racially charged. There's just no good reason for it. It's nothing to do with football. But yet, these are the same people who would say, we're not racist. So I think there's some racism. I think it's undercover.
Language has changed, but the sentiment hasn't.
It's bad enough that I feel that I need to tell my 7-year-old about it, and I need to let her know there are people out there who do not like you, who may want to hurt you because you are black, which is really, really sad. I think things are better, but I think it could also be better. It's time for Britain to do better.
Until people in power start to understand and feel what it feels like to be oppressed, we won't progress.